Welcome back, YouTube. We're here again. I don't know if you remember this. This is the Lexus is300. It's got that 2JZ, son. No turbo though, so oh well. Anyways, today his shocks are blown out like that high school girl you used to know. We're doing the Ibach Pro Kit. So it's springs, Swaybars, then we got KYB struts, shocks, and got new mounts and all that stuff. So it should be pretty good. So I'm going to go step by step how to build the strut, how to change the sway bars, how to do all that stuff. Let's get started. Here's the part number I'm using for the rear shocks, strut, whatever you want to call it. It's like a hybrid. Here's the part number for the front strut. Here's the part number for the spring and sway bar kit. There's the part numbers for the boxes. And this box is the sway bars. Here is the part number for the strut mount minus the bearing. Let's start by using a 21mm to remove the lug nuts and take the wheel off. We need to get this unit out of the way. So the strut mount bolt has a double nut. We're going to take the top nut off here and the what looks like a 10mm over here. We'll remove those two and then we can just move this out of the way for now. To get this box out of the way, use a 12mm. Take off the double nut that's on top and move this out of the way. Use a 12mm deep socket and just break these nuts loose. Don't remove them yet. Use a 10mm socket and remove this bolt that holds the brake line to the strut. Use a 14mm socket or a wrench and take the nut off for the sway bar end link. Use a 17mm on the bottom nut that holds the bolt that goes through the bottom of the strut. Pull out the bolt that goes through the bottom of the strut. Since you're going to do the whole front at the same time, once the sway bar is disconnected, you can push it straight down out of the way, so we can bring when we disconnect the strut, we can bring it out this way. What we're going to do to make this come out easy is we're going to have another nut on this sway bar end link, so we're going to remove that. It's on the other side, and then there's a bolt right there that goes into the control arm, and that holds this entire little cradle. On this one it's the sport design model, so it has this little sensor deal. I don't know how that exactly works, but that's connected to that. But once this bracket is loose, we can just pull the bracket towards the inside of the car and we won't have a clearance problem at the spindle. As you can see, now there is zero issues with clearance. I just slid the bracket over here and we're all good down below. Last step to getting it out is removing the 3 nuts up here. Now, when you remove the last nut, you're going to want to hold and support the strut from underneath so it doesn't fall and possibly rip your brake line. So hold it from underneath and unscrew the final nut, and then you can pull it out from the bottom. When pulling it from the bottom, make sure you fish it underneath this brake line. Bring it down and out this way so you don't damage your brake line. Everything we're using is brand new except for the strut mount bearing. For some reason, I've been to all different websites. I have not been to the dealer. Yes, I know they might have it, but every one you get, strut mount, is without the bearing. So I'm going to swap the bearing from that one to this one and then put it all back together. We are also reusing this dust cover, so you just pull up on it and it will come off. It's just in this little groove that'll come off. Then we can get to the nut in the middle. Before you remove that nut though, you're going to want to get the spring compressor tool set from AutoZone. You can rent it. You pay up front, but when you return the tool, you get it for all your money back. So do that. We're just going to tighten it enough where we see the spring to start to compress, but it doesn't take all the pressure off. That way the rod doesn't just spin and the top doesn't just spin, and we can stand on it and break loose this nut without having the kinetic force from the spring shoot and possibly hurt yourself. So we're going to tighten it just a little bit. You'll see the spring move a little, stop, and then remove the nut. The installation is going to be a little bit different. The nut in the center will be a 17 millimeter. The dust cover is part of this rubber bushing deal, so I'm just going to trim it at, since this is tore up, I'm going to trim it at this top ridge right here. We're going to cut straight down the middle right here, and then that will equal what is on the factory bump stop. So I used the angle grinder with a cutting disc, and I just cut down the center. And so now we're going to put this onto the strut. You're going to have to compress this spring a little harder than the stock one because the spring rate's higher. You're going to have the spring end here line up, go into this groove, and then at the top, this also has a flat edge. So this flat edge here lines up with the flat edge on the mount. So you're going to have to line that up as you're putting this together before you can get it to go. I used this one, I put some PB Blaster on it, and now it looks black again. Same thing with the little cover for the end. So you're going to go bump stop, then the spring, then the black rubber piece here, and then the mount. Oh boy, guys, this one's irritating. So it doesn't have an actual strut bearing because the strut doesn't turn when the car turns, which is fine except for lining up these three with the bottom being straight. It's going to take a couple times. So what I found works is I put these on, then I held this up under the hood, and then I verified how straight this part was at the bottom to be straight with that. And then I looked at the holes, and I have this just loose enough where I can spin the top. And then once it looks like it's going to be in a good spot, I'm going to release these right now and then test fit it. If it's off a little bit, put these things back on and then turn it, whatever slightest amount I need to in order to get it to actually fit in there correctly. So it took me 2 times to get it to line up perfect. So now it's all lined up, and you're going to just reverse the steps, put in the same bolts you took out, tighten them down. If you want torque specs, I don't do torque specs. You are free to do torque specs. Just look online. Just make it tight. I mean, the big bolts, you should be using a ratchet with either a box wrench off the end or a baby little pipe. Just do it till it's tight, and don't make it break, but just make it tight. Once you're up here, go ahead, tighten these down. I just use a 3/8 ratchet with 2 hands. No extension, no big ratchet, no nothing. No pipe. 2 hands. I think these are supposed to be somewhere around neighborhood of 38, 40 foot-pounds. They're not extremely tight, but they're not loose either. So just make it tight till it doesn't want to turn anymore without you, just don't break it. I'm going to say that again. Put back the 2 10mm bolts that hold the ABS brake sensor. Put back this electronic unit. 10mm bolt there, and the factory 12mm nut on there. Take your dust cover and you just push it to where that little piece clips in, and look at it, so beautiful. Now it's time to do the other side. That is the last of the strut setup. We're not going to hook up the Swaybar again because I have a box of Swaybars, so that's next. Yay! Hey, it's rear shock time. Get the tire off first thing. We need to get back here. So, there's a clip there, and a clip up there. Pull those clips out, and then pull the carpet back. Use a 14mm and remove these 3 nuts on top. Remove these 2 bolts. They're 12mm. Now remove the Swaybar end link. It's going to be a 12mm. Use a 19mm. Remove the bolt from the right side or the back side of the car, whichever way you feel like looking at it. You're going to need an alignment, but mark the alignment deal with some nail polish or something. Now use a 19mm and remove this bolt. I'm going to make it easy for myself. Some people use a pry bar to pry this up. I'm not going to do all that. I'm just going to undo here, 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 and then it'll pivot on that, and this whole arm will come down pretty much as far as I need it to. You just pull down a little bit, and you can get this all the way out. To tear this apart, first we want to take some spring pressure off of the entire assembly. So you put these on, tighten them down to where you see it move a little bit, then break loose the nut on the end, and then squeeze these a little bit more and remove the rest of the nut. When you take it apart, take that nut off, it'll come apart into these few parts, and then remove these, and then you could, whatever you're going to reuse. In my case, I'm not using the spring or the shock, I'm just reusing the top part. I took one apart, right? I left one together. The reason I did that is because of the angle of what this hole, you need that angle correct with the angle of these 2 that go to the body, and then the 3 up top that go through the car. So, got to make sure it's seated. Then we're going to turn the shock to match, so like that. And then we're just going to, over here, we're going to verify that the angle looks identical. So the bottom is touching the floor, the up is, this side's up. We have here, so I need to rotate maybe a little bit more, something like that. Slide this thing back in, just the opposite way you slid out your original one. Now, I have an issue where I got the bolt through one side and it's not coming through the other side. Well, there's a slot down here. You just take a little pry bar, you just pry it over, and then you tap it in, and it'll fit right in. Line up the Swaybar end link and put the 10mm back in, and then put the nut and tighten it together. If you're doing this on the floor, you use a jack. We're on a lift, so I'm using a jack stand deal. You're going to use this to help push up this control arm in order to get this bolt lined up to push it in. Put the bolt in from the front of the car to the back, so the washer and the nut are on this side. Just put it in where it's loose because it's not lining up right now. So we're going to spin it from the front side and then tighten down the nut. Now that we have these three at the bottom tight, we're going to lower the car and go in the trunk, and we're going to tighten the 14mm nuts that go on the top. Use your 14mm, tighten all this down, give it a little torque with your hand ratchet after, and we're done in here. So you can put the carpet back and put the 3 clips back into the carpet to hold it. We're going to tighten these two. Here's the rear sway bar part number. Here's the hardware kit part number. Use a 14mm and remove the sway bar end links on both sides. Use a 12mm socket and remove the 2 bolts that hold the straps on the bushings for the sway bar. So you're going to have some on both sides. As soon as you disconnect both sides, it'll pretty much fall out. No, you're just going to snake it. Oh, sorry, I messed up the camera. Just going to snake it through like this. And it's out. It's going to come with this grease. This grease, you're going to put a bunch inside of the here, and obviously the other side. Then we're going to install it with the split. There's a split here, facing back this way. So you have the curve going forward, the split will face back this way. Alright, once you get it in, once you get it in, anyways, there's one part of this rubber that has like a lip, a hard lip, and then there's one part that has a recess. The lip part goes around the body of the car. The recess part is where the grooves on this hook onto that. Now that we have this torqued down on both sides, we're going to start putting in the end links. I'm choosing the center hole, put the nut back on, torque it down, and that's all there is to the sway bar. Sway bar in the rear is done. Now it's time for the front sway bar. Problem is we got all this shit everywhere. So get your handy dandy 10mm and start taking out like 100 of these 10mm bolts that hold this on all the way around. And then we can get to the sway bar. So let's get to it. Here's the part number for the front sway bar. Here's the hardware kit for the front sway bar. Use a 14mm, remove the nut from the sway bar end link. Use a 12mm socket and remove the 2 bolts on each side that hold the sway bar in, and then the sway bar will more or less just fall on your head. So you just sort of work it, rotate it, work it, get around these plastic pieces. On this side there's a hose, so you're going to feed it that way over the AC line. So you're going to have to feed it up and over when you put the new one in. Spooge a bunch of your juice inside the bushing to lubricate it with your white juice. And then we're going to slide this over with the flat top facing up. We're going to do the split towards the front this way. Anyways, are you good? We're good. Alright, feed this end over the AC hose. You're going to have to snake it in. Snake it in. There we go. Spin that around. And this one, you just snake it into the wheel. There's plastic. Boom! Now we're going to put the straps in the 12mm bolts back. Leave these loose a little bit so that if you have to shift the sway bar left or right to get it together, you can. So these are a little bit loose on both sides. Put both sway bar end links together, tighten those down. Once you have now the 4 hangers tight, go ahead, put this back, and we're all done. I'd like to thank everyone for checking out another Fat Guy Builds episode. I'd like to thank Edge Auto Sport for hooking us up with some parts. And if you want to get the same kind of parts or same parts for your car or different parts, I don't care, you can hit them up. I'll put the link in the description down below. Until next time, wrench on.